Investigation revealed she'd been moving money between accounts to cover up her theft. They had evidence of this behavior going back 6 months, well before our separation even started. The bank fired her immediately and said they were pressing criminal charges for embezzlement. Mildred tried telling them I drove her to steal because of the divorce stress. The bank's legal team didn't care about her excuses since the theft started before any marriage problems. Her 20-year career in banking was completely destroyed, and she'd never work in finance again. Conrad got a call that afternoon from Jorge's office saying he was withdrawing from Mildred's case. The official filing cited irreconcilable differences in case strategy, but Conrad heard the real story. Jorge discovered Mildred had lied about multiple key facts, including the timeline of events. She'd also hidden the criminal investigation from him, which made him look foolish in court. Word spread quickly in the legal community that Mildred couldn't be trusted as a client. She was now scrambling to find any lawyer willing to take her case with her reputation. 2 weeks later, Jennifer and I went to my company's quarterly mixer at the downtown Marriott. We'd barely gotten our drinks when 3 different coworkers pulled me aside to mention weird phone calls they'd been getting from someone claiming to be doing a background check on me. The caller asked strange questions about my mental health and whether I'd ever shown violent tendencies. My boss caught up with us near the appetizer table and steered me toward a quiet corner. He told me he'd been watching how I handled all the personal drama without letting it affect my work performance, and he was impressed. Right there at the party, he offered me the senior director position with a $40,000 raise. Jennifer squeezed my hand when I was accepted. The next Tuesday, I got home from work to find 2 police cars in my driveway and my neighbor standing on his lawn recording everything with his phone. The cops explained that Mildred had shown up around noon with a locksmith, claiming she'd lost her keys. My neighbor recognized the situation and called them immediately. The locksmith had already changed the front door lock when police arrived. The officers made Mildred give me the new keys and reminded her that she couldn't lock me out of my own property without a court order. She screamed about how it was her house too and I was the one who should leave. The cops just shook their heads and told her to leave or they'd arrest her for trespassing. My neighbor sent me the video of her kicking my mailbox on her way to her car. That weekend, Mia called asking if she could come over to look at some documents. She'd been getting conflicting stories from both of us and wanted to see evidence for herself. I laid out everything on the dining room table, including the bank statements, the Facebook posts, Brad's messages, and the court filings. She spent 3 hours going through it all, taking pictures with her phone. She left without saying much, but called me that night crying. She'd confronted her mother about the lies and told her she needed professional help. Mildred had screamed at her for taking my side and accused me of poisoning our daughter against her. Mia said she was done trying to stay neutral. Conrad called me Monday morning with huge news. The forensic accountant he'd hired had finished reviewing our finances and found something shocking. Mildred had been moving money from our joint investment accounts into a separate account for over 2 years. She'd taken almost $80,000 total, transferring small amounts every month to avoid detection. The transfers started long before she ever mentioned Brad or an open marriage. This meant she'd been planning her exit for years while pretending everything was fine. Conrad said this discovery changed everything in our favor, since it proved premeditation and financial fraud. Thursday night, Brad texted me a video file with a message saying I needed to see this. The video showed Mildred at his apartment door at 2 in the morning, clearly drunk. She was begging him to take her back, saying she'd made a mistake choosing me over him. When he tried to close the door, she threatened to tell his new girlfriend that he'd been sleeping with her the whole time. She said she'd ruin his relationship unless he helped her get back at me. Brad had recorded the whole thing on his doorbell camera and told her to leave or he'd call the cops. He said he'd testify in court if I needed him to. Sunday at church was interesting. Pastor Rick stood up during announcements and said that due to personal matters requiring attention, Mildred would be stepping down from her positions on the worship team and the women's ministry board. He asked everyone to pray for our family during this difficult time. Mildred stood up from her pew and stormed out, slamming the sanctuary doors behind her. After service, at least 6 people came up to me expressing support and saying they knew I was the victim here. One elderly lady patted my arm and said she'd seen too many marriages destroyed by selfishness to blame the innocent party. Monday afternoon, I got a call from a woman named Melanie who said she'd been hired by Jorge's firm to investigate me. She sounded uncomfortable as she explained that Mildred had asked her to plant evidence of an affair in my car and office. Melanie said she'd quit the job immediately and wanted me to know what Mildred had tried to do. She emailed me a signed affidavit describing Mildred's attempt to frame me, including recordings of their conversations. She said she'd already reported it to the State Bar Association. By Wednesday, Mildred had found new legal representation, some guy who advertised on bus benches and late-night TV. He immediately filed 6 different motions, including demands for emergency spousal support, exclusive use of the house, and a restraining order against Jennifer. Conrad laughed when he read them, saying they were so poorly written that a first-year law student could defeat them. He knocked down all 6 motions in a single response, but warned me that this bottom feeder would keep filing garbage to run up my legal bills. He suggested we push for a settlement conference to end this cleanly before it got more expensive. Friday brought a certified letter from the IRS about an audit of our joint tax returns for the past 3 years. They discovered unusual deductions for a consulting business that didn't exist. Mildred had been claiming fake business expenses, including a home office, travel, and equipment purchases. Conrad brought in a tax attorney who discovered Mildred had forged my signature on amended returns I'd never seen. The IRS agent said this was criminal tax fraud, and they'd be pursuing charges. The next Monday, Jennifer's friend who worked in IT at Mildred's old bank called with more evidence. They'd been reviewing security footage as part of the criminal investigation and found video of Mildred teaching other tellers how to manipulate their cash drawers without triggering alerts. She'd been running a whole scheme for months. The bank's legal department decided to press full criminal charges for embezzlement and conspiracy. That afternoon, 2 detectives showed up at Mildred's friend's house where she'd been staying and arrested her. The friend called me screaming that this was all my fault, and I'd destroyed Mildred's life out of spite. I hung up on her and tried to go back to work, but couldn't focus on anything. 3 hours later, Mia called me crying so hard I could barely understand her words. She'd heard about her mother's arrest from a friend who saw it on the local news website. I left work early and met her at a coffee shop where she sat with her face all red and puffy from crying. She grabbed my hands across the table and begged me to bail her mother out. She kept saying her mom needed help, not jail, that this whole thing had broken her mentally. I told her about the bank fraud and embezzlement, but Mia just shook her head and said prison would destroy what was left of her mother. Against every bit of common sense I had, I drove to the courthouse and posted the $20,000 bail. The judge set strict conditions, including no contact with me, Jennifer, or any bank employees who might be witnesses. Mildred walked out of the holding area looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, hair messy and makeup gone. She didn't say anything, just got in her friend's car and left. My phone buzzed 2 hours later with a text from her calling me names and saying she'd make me pay for ruining her life. I screenshot it and sent it to Conrad, who immediately filed a bail violation report. The prosecutor met with Mildred's lawyer the next week and offered her a deal for the bank fraud. She'd get probation and have to pay back what she stole, but no prison time if she pleaded guilty. Her lawyer practically begged her to take it right there in the conference room, but she stood up and insisted she was innocent. She claimed I'd set her up somehow, that the bank was lying, that everyone was against her. Her lawyer tried to withdraw from the case after that meeting, but the judge wouldn't let him since the trial was already scheduled. Conrad called to tell me our house was going on the market as part of the divorce settlement, and we'd split whatever it sold for. The realtor scheduled an open house for Saturday afternoon, and I made sure to be gone. I got a call that evening from the realtor who sounded completely frazzled. Mildred had shown up halfway through and started telling potential buyers about murders that never happened in the basement. She described bloodstains that didn't exist and talked about hearing screams at night. One family with young kids practically ran out of the house. The realtor had to call the police, who escorted Mildred off the property. Jennifer came over that Monday night with boxes and started packing her things. She'd gotten promoted to regional manager at her company, but said the promotion came with a transfer to another city. We both knew that wasn't the only reason she was leaving, though. She hugged me and said she cared about me, but couldn't handle all the drama with Mildred anymore. I helped her load boxes into her car and watched her drive away, feeling more alone than I had in months. The criminal trial started 3 weeks later in the county courthouse downtown. I wore my only suit and sat in the witness waiting room until they called me. The prosecutor asked me simple questions about our joint accounts and finances, while Mildred stared at me from the defendant's table. Her face kept twitching, and her hands were clenched, so tight her knuckles were white. The jury members kept looking between us and taking notes. Some of them shook their heads when the prosecutor showed the security footage of Mildred teaching other tellers how to steal. During the lunch recess, I went to use the courthouse bathroom and found Mildred waiting by the sinks. She backed me into a corner and started saying she'd destroy everything I cared about. She said she'd turn Mia against me, ruin my career, make sure I died alone and miserable. What she didn't know was that the courthouse had security cameras everywhere, including the bathrooms. 2 bailiffs came in and arrested her right there for witness intimidation and violating bail conditions. The trial continued without her in the courtroom since she was back in custody. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before coming back with guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week. Mildred stood there in her orange jumpsuit as the judge gave her 18 months in minimum security prison plus 5 years of probation. He specifically said her lack of remorse and attempts to blame others had influenced his decision. Mildred's face went completely white when he said 18 months. Conrad met with me the next day to finalize the divorce settlement. With Mildred heading to prison for felony fraud, she'd basically forfeited any claim to marital assets beyond the bare minimum. I'd keep the house sale proceeds, my retirement accounts, and most of our savings. She'd get $5,000 when she got out of prison, and that was it. Mia struggled hard with her mother going to prison. She started seeing a therapist twice a week and moved back into her old room at the house while we waited for it to sell. We'd eat dinner together most nights and watch movies on weekends. She'd tell me about her job at the marketing firm, and I'd help her with her car insurance and taxes. It took 3 months to sell the house at a loss because of Mildred's open house stunt. I found a smaller place across town, a 2-bedroom ranch with a nice yard and no memories attached to it. Mia helped me pick out furniture at IKEA and painted the living room a warm gray color. We hung pictures of just the 2 of us, leaving out any that included Mildred. The new place felt clean and peaceful, in a way the old house never had. 6 months passed with Mildred serving her sentence at the minimum security facility upstate. The letter arrived through Conrad on a Tuesday morning while I was sorting through bills at my kitchen table. Mildred's handwriting covered 3 pages, explaining how prison therapy groups had opened her eyes to what she'd thrown away. She wrote about the other women's stories, making her realize she'd destroyed our family for nothing. She asked for forgiveness and said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again. I read it twice, then filed it away, without responding. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer asking if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up. We met at the Starbucks downtown, where she showed up with her hair cut shorter and a guy's class ring on a chain around her neck. She ordered her usual vanilla latte while I got black coffee, and we sat by the window watching people rush past. She told me about her new boyfriend from her gym and how they were planning a trip to Costa Rica. She asked how I was doing with everything and seemed genuinely happy when I said things were getting better. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, and she said she was glad we could be friends after everything. Driving home, I realized I actually meant it when I wished her the best. Work became my main focus after that, with the new division launch taking up 60-hour weeks. Sean turned out to be perfect as deputy director, handling the technical details while I managed client relationships. The whole Mildred drama had become old news around the office, with people treating me normally again instead of whispering when I walked by. Building something from scratch gave me purpose beyond just getting through each day. The team responded well to my leadership style, and we landed 3 major contracts in the first quarter. My boss pulled me aside after a board presentation to say I'd exceeded all expectations. Spring arrived, and with it came Mia's college graduation from the state university 3 hours away. I drove up early to get good seats in the massive stadium, where thousands of families gathered to celebrate. When they called her name for the honor students, I stood up cheering louder than anyone around me. During her valedictorian speech, she looked right at me when she talked about learning that people can survive anything with dignity and grace. She mentioned how watching someone rebuild after loss had taught her more than any textbook ever could. The prison had set up a video link, so Mildred could watch from a small conference room with a guard present. After the ceremony, Mia showed me the text from her mom saying how proud she was. We went to dinner at Mia's favorite Italian place near campus, where she introduced me to her boyfriend, who seemed nervous but sincere. That summer, Crystal from HR transferred to the marketing department, which meant we could finally act on the connection we'd both felt during those investigation meetings. Our first date was just coffee after work, but it turned into a 4-hour conversation about everything from music to travel dreams. She already knew my whole messy story from the HR files, but said she admired how I'd handled myself through it all. We took things slow with weekly dinners and weekend concerts at the park downtown. She had this way of making me laugh at things I hadn't found funny in years. By fall, we were officially together, and she'd met Mia, who gave her approval immediately. The bank's restitution check arrived in October for $23,000 from what they'd recovered from Mildred's theft. I drove straight to my financial advisor and set up a college fund for future grandchildren, even though Mia insisted she wasn't having kids anytime soon. When I showed Mia the paperwork that evening, she got quiet, then hugged me tight with tears running down her face. She said turning something so ugly into something hopeful was exactly what she expected from me. The call about Mildred's early release came through her sister, who explained that good behavior and overcrowding meant she'd serve 12 months instead of 18. Mildred would be moving to her sister's place in Ohio to start over with a job lined up at a call center doing customer service. The sister asked if I had any message to pass along, but I just wished them both well and hung up. Mia started visiting her mom once a month, driving the 6 hours each way on weekends. She'd come back quiet and tired, saying their relationship would never be what it was, but at least they could talk without fighting. One random Thursday, I stopped at my usual coffee shop before work and literally ran into Brad coming out as I was going in. He was with a pretty brunette who he introduced as his fiancée while looking uncomfortable as hell. He asked if we could talk for a minute, so his fiancée went to get their car while we stood outside. He apologized again for his part in everything and said Mildred had told him she was separated when they started working out together. He never knew about me or Mia until I showed up at the gym that day. We shook hands and went our separate ways without any drama. Pastor Rick called me that winter, asking if I'd speak at a marriage counseling workshop about boundaries and forgiveness. I spent 3 weeks preparing what to say, then stood in front of 40 couples sharing the whole story from Applebee's to the divorce. Several people thanked me afterward for showing that sometimes leaving is the healthiest choice you can make. The beach vacation with Crystal was her idea for our 1-year anniversary, a quiet resort in North Carolina where we could walk for miles without seeing anyone. On our 3rd night there, I proposed during sunset with a ring I'd been carrying for a month, waiting for the right moment. She laughed about marrying me despite seeing all my dirty laundry through the HR investigation. When we called Mia to share the news, she immediately offered to be in the wedding party. 3 months before the wedding, a letter arrived from Ohio with Mildred's sister's return address, but Mildred's handwriting inside. She wrote that she'd been sober for 6 months and working on herself in therapy and wanted to attend our wedding if we'd allow it. She promised to sit in the back, not cause any problems, and leave right after the ceremony without talking to anyone if that's what we wanted. Crystal found me reading it at the kitchen table and sat down while I explained the whole thing. Mia came over that night, and we spent hours going through every possible scenario of what could go wrong versus what message it would send to exclude her completely. We decided she could attend the ceremony only, had to sit in the last row, and couldn't come to the reception or any other wedding events. The wedding day came faster than expected, with